Welcome back to the Oxendine Law Podcast. Jarrod Oxendine and Christine Palmer, your host and co-host. And today we're talking about an important topic, Christine. We're talking about how to break the news about divorce to your kids. Obviously, the way you do that can greatly affect your kids, both their emotional well-being, their stability. So the way you handle that is very important, and we're going to delve into some pros and cons of ways to do it, ways not to do it, and some pitfalls to avoid along the way. So let's dive right in, Christine. You and your spouse have made the decision to get a divorce. Hopefully, you've made a joint decision and you're going to do it as amicably as possible. And the first thing that is on your mind is, oh my goodness, what should we tell the kids? There's a right way to do that. There's a wrong way to do that.
There is, and I always give my clients this sort of caveat. When I'm giving you advice, I'm going to be giving you two types: advice about law and advice about life. This is one of those times where those usually very closely coincide. So when you're talking about the law side, judges don't like you improperly involving your children in litigation. In fact, the standard language on a parenting plan even says it in there that you should not be involving the children in litigation. So, on the law side, you don't want to overly involve your children. But then comes the life side. I mean, I'm a child of divorce. I was there once. It is, in my opinion, it is a huge disservice to your children to hide a divorce from your children. Because if you think about it from their perspective, what happens is you've faked it so long, they think everything is fine. And then suddenly they wake up and their whole world has changed. Remember, you had to go through a transition and you're an adult. You know what you're doing. You even made this choice, or your spouse made this choice, regardless. So you have been given the opportunity to think about it, to mourn this marriage. You've had the opportunity to work through it. If you don't afford your children that opportunity, you're doing them a huge disservice. If you wait until the end and it's just like, okay, so you sit down at a dinner table and you're eating your spaghetti and suddenly it's like, okay, so starting tomorrow, daddy doesn't live here anymore.
Yes,
That's
we don't want to do that.
tragic.
It is. And so I think the first tip is, even if you hate your spouse, like y'all are just like fighting like cats and dogs, do yourselves the favor, the kids the favor of at least getting together for that one conversation and saying, when are we going to do this? In other words, what's the timing going to be? Let's do it together and let's get on the same page about what we're going to say.
Sure. It is super important that both parents are involved in that conversation. To the extent that is possible, it needs to happen. I mean, I know there are some extreme circumstances where physical abuse or something along those lines may have impeded you from doing that. But to the extent it is possible, which is, friends, it's 95% of y'all. I know everyone's going to sit there and say, it's too toxic. I'm one of that 5%. You're not. Suck it up. Get it together for your kids. Get a plan together and sit down. And that's what us attorneys can help with too. I've done a ton of basically script writing for clients to talk about, okay, if y'all can't get on the same page, let me and the other attorney suggest some language, send it back and forth, and then you familiarize yourself with it. You know, you're going to read it to your kids, but you are on the same page about the explanation. And most importantly, rather than focusing on the divorce part of it, the kids' first fear is future. So don't focus on why it happened or anything like that, or just talk about you're going to be fine in the future. Stay future oriented and make sure that you're having these age appropriate conversations with your children. A lot of times there are children who are 14 and 15 years old. Look, you can tell them a lot. You don't want to tell them again about the details of why it happened, but talk to them like young adults when it comes to what's next. Because their fear is, am I going to have to change schools? Does this mean I'm not going to get a car when I turn 15? Because we're going to have, those are the fears that the kids have. So talk to them at an age appropriate level. If you've got younger children, you clearly don't want to be talking as detailed, but make sure that you know your kid better than anybody. Talk to them at the level that they understand so that they feel involved, because you are changing their environment drastically. And if they aren't in some way involved, they're going to feel so out of control they can act out.
That's right. And so let's kind of give a specific example, because I know people are still wondering, what exactly do I say? So let me give you one example of maybe the right way to do it, and then we'll give you some examples of the wrong way to do it. Right way, you and your spouse get together. You decide on the time, you decide on the location. You sit down together in a very calm tone, and one of you starts. Look, Johnny and Mary, your dad and I have something that we want to discuss with you that we've been talking about for a long time. Unfortunately, your mom and I have decided that it's best for us to go separate ways, but this is totally everything to do with us. It has nothing to do with y'all. It's not y'all's fault. Everything is going to be fine. You're going to still get to keep your friends. You're going to get to stay at the same school. You're not going to be homeless. Nothing changed except now you have two homes and you've got maybe two birthday parties and you've got two Christmases and you're not losing your mom. You're not losing your dad. Everything is going to be just as it was for you guys, except mom and dad just aren't going to live together. And you're still going to get to spend both time with both parents. That would be one example,
Sure. And it's
depending on the age and maturity of your kids, of how you could have that conversation. Now, that's much better. Think about this scenario where mom rushes home to the kids and she tries to beat dad to the punch and she sits down and she says, your dad and I are getting divorced. He's an asshole. He doesn't love me anymore. This is all him. I don't want this divorce. It's all your dad's fault. Actually, he's been cheating on me for years and I just found out. So we are going to punish him and take everything we possibly can from him and get you out of this situation. Right. And then dad, maybe the next day, sits down with the kids and says something completely opposite. Neither of what the parents have said is good. They've done it horribly. The kids are, like you said, are terrified. They're uncertain about their future. They're probably thinking it really is their fault. And all that could have been avoided if the parents had just been smart about it. Even if you can't get on the same page with your spouse to sit down and have the joint conversation, let's say you have the conversation separately. There's still a right way to do that.
There is.
You can still sit down and say, really the same thing I said earlier. It's just a one-on-one conversation instead of having the other parent there.
Right. And remember that it's okay to tell your children that, hey, I don't actually have all the answers yet, but we're going to work all that out together. Because again, that level of inclusion lets them feel like things are not out of control. As long as they know it's going to be okay, just saying, I'm not exactly sure. We're going to have two homes. We haven't picked out the second home yet. We're going to work together as a family to make sure it's the best thing for you. So you don't have to come to them with answers. You need to just be comforting and also remember to allow them to ask questions. So many parents just want to cut that off and say, well, that's for me and your dad to figure out. And that's a fine answer as long as it's said in a kind way, because you really want to hear what their concerns are. Some of them are going to be like, okay, cool, and act like they don't care. So pay attention. Maybe they care and they're not letting on yet. Maybe they really don't, right? Like maybe this is a scenario where you're such a good mom and he's such a good dad that they feel so secure in their parents that they're not really worried about any of that living in the same household. They may say, all right, cool.
And I've actually heard kids look at mom or dad and say, thank goodness.
Finally.
I was wondering how y'all were still together, and I was wondering when y'all were going to decide to break up because this household environment's been horrible.
Yeah, and slightly older children, that's super common.
They're relieved.
Yeah.
And actually, it brings me to a good point. How many times have you had somebody sitting in your office that's in a horrible marriage? It's a horrible, toxic household environment, and they say, God, I really need to get out of this situation, but I'm just going to stick it out for my kids.
Yeah.
I'm going to wait till they graduate high school, and then I'm going to file for divorce.
You're not doing those kids any favors.
You're ruining your kids. All the psychologists will tell you that it's much better to get the kids out of that environment and hopefully give them a chance to see what a normal, loving household environment is like before they graduate high school and leave the nest. Because if you don't, they think that's normal. And when they get in relationships, they're going to treat their partner or their spouse or their boyfriend or girlfriend the same way you were treated because that's all they know.
Right. And I do remind parents that if you are not being your best mom or your best dad, you're doing them a disservice. And it's virtually impossible to do that in a toxic household. You can't be your best version of mom if you're not your best version of yourself.
Good point. Can't say that any better, so I won't try to. Here's one other point I'll leave everybody with. You've had the conversation. You've done it the right way. You've told your kids that you're getting divorced. Maintain that consistency. Sometimes parents screw up by doing it the right way initially, and then it just falls apart. Then they start talking bad about the other parent, or they try to one-up the other parent, or they put the kids in the middle, or they try to question the child every time the child comes back from mom's house about, where was your mom? What were you doing? Was she doing this? Was she doing that? What did she feed you? Right. And then that just ruins everything. So maintain that consistency. And if your child is struggling, maybe you're doing everything you can the right way, but your spouse just keeps screwing it up. If you see your kid is struggling, get them in counseling. There's nothing wrong with using counselors. Counselors are very effective. I know some people see counselors as four-letter words. Counselors are very specialized. They know what to look for. They know what to say to your kids to get them back on track and help them understand this is not their fault, that this is just their parent.
Right. And that's another time when having a very experienced divorce attorney will help you out. We have a huge network of counselors, not just for our clients, but for the children. And sometimes, you need to go another step further. Maybe we need some co parent coordination, some co parent counseling. Just because you're not getting along as parents right now doesn't mean that we can't work on improving that. And sometimes the first step of that is saying, all right, I understand I could be better at times too. So I'm willing to do that. So we have a ton of resources to improve parents' communication with one another, which by 100% of the time, no matter what, is going to improve your relationship with your kids and your kids' experience as they proceed through a divorce.
Divorce can be tough on kids, but it doesn't have to. If you take the right approach, it can actually be done in a very healthy and positive way. We see parents all the time that actually are better friends once they divorce and separate than they were when they were together. And if you do that the right way and you have two separate loving households, that is always much better than having one single toxic household environment. So take these tips. We hope you do. It's one of the most important things we do in cases is make sure that the kids are taken care of and follow these words of advice so that you can divorce successfully and helpfully, not only for yourself, but also for the kids. Check us out. We're on all social media platforms. Hit that subscribe button if you're on YouTube so that you get notifications of all future podcast episodes. As always, we appreciate you checking us out and hanging with us. We'll see you next week.